use for your project is, are you pouring into a mold? Or do you want a thin coating where you see all the texture? Or do you want a domed surface, meaning that you want a thick resin? So Pebeo has a crystal resin, which is more water-like, which means it's thin. So if you use it on a painting, you're going to get almost, it looks like water. You're going to see the texture of the paint from underneath it. But if you want something that coats your painting so that your painting looks like it has a super smooth surface to it, then you're going to use the glazing resin, because the glazing resin dries domed like this. And on the boxes, these are new boxes, but on the boxes, let's see, this is the crystal resin, so you see the mold here? So that's the thin resin that you would be pouring into a mold, or that you want to have. It sheets like water, super thin. You know what's great about that? When you're pouring it into a mold that has lots of detail, like this, you don't get bubbles in it because it's thin like water. But if you tried to use a thick resin in a mold, which you can do, you're more likely to get bubbles in it. So that's why you want to use a thinner resin for your mold making and a thicker resin for coating. Like a piece of jewelry maybe, you might have a piece of jewelry and you want that domed top to the jewelry, then you would use the glazing resin, which is more like a molasses in thickness, but it also can tend to get more bubbles in it because it's thicker. Okay, so the kits come, this is the crystal resin and the glazing resin, so it says on the box there whether it's crystal resin or glazing resin. And the crystal resin is the one that I'm going to show you right now, because that's what I'm going to pour in the mold. Alright. So it comes in 150 milliliter, 300 milliliter, or 750 milliliter. And at the show, we're introducing a larger size, up to 6 liters. Now it's a 2-to-1. So for instance, with the 6 liter, unless they changed it on me, with the new formula. But with these formulas, as you can see here, you're going to have twice as much of the resin as you have of the hardener. But the way that you're going to know what the ratio is, if you ever go, I don't remember which one, I do twice as much, you just look on here, this is 500 milliliters, and this is 250 milliliters. So you're going to do half, one of this to 2 of this, because you have twice as much. So that's how you can kind of tell in a pinch if you don't remember. So this is what the glazing resin looks like when you pour it onto a silicone sheet. See how it has like that rounded edge? And I can't put the crystal resin on a silicone sheet because otherwise it just makes like a really super thin, right, little bit. But I can use that in a mold like this and then pop out the crystals after they're molded. So let's make some. Oh, you can also color it. Like these, this red is actually Pebeo's red resin. So Pebeo has a couple of colors. They have lapis, which is a blue. They have amber, which some of the people in the class had the amber crystals. You had the amber crystals, right? There's yellow, and then green. Okay, and then and something they call ruby, which is kind of more magenta than it is red, and that's what that is. And then you can also use vitriol to color it. So this is colored with vitriol. Notice it's not crystal clear because it's an oil paint, and if you put oil paint into a resin, it'll still harden, but it's not crystal clear. So if you're doing a black one like that, it doesn't matter if it's crystal clear or if it's transparent or not. So I like to make the black resin crystals using the glazing resin and the black vitriol or the black ceramic, okay, to do that, because you don't have to worry about the transparency, right? And then Pebeo also has pearlescent resins. So this is a pearlescent white. There's a pearlescent white and a pearlescent gold. So it already has mica in it. The chemistry is already correct. Because if you add any additives to this resin in order to get colored resin, you need to be sure that you do not put any more than 10% of colorant to resin, because otherwise your resin may not harden. And then people go, well, Tristina, then what do I do if I made a mistake and the resin doesn't harden? And I say, you mix some new resin and you pour it over top, and then it'll harden, right? So you leave yourself a little room if you're working in a panel, so that if you have a mistake, you can just pour more resin right over top of it. So the resin from Pebeo comes in a package that has in it one pair of like starter gloves, and then some measuring cups and some stir sticks. So essentially all that you need to mix your resin is a cup. And I'm using a clear cup, so I'll show you why in just a second, because when the reaction starts taking place between the resin and the hardener, the two parts, it does something special, and you can see it in a clear cup. So these are 30 milliliter little measuring cups. If you're gonna work with a larger amount, you can use one of those cups that's graduated. They sell, a lot of resin makers have the graduated cups. I don't usually use glass cups, I usually just use plastic, the graduated plastic cups. And so, because if you leave a little bit of resin in the plastic cup and it gets hard, you can pop it out if you're in a plastic cup, because the plastic cup gives. But if you're in a glass cup, oh well, goodbye. You may have to throw it away. So 30 milliliters, what does that mean? If I'm gonna mix this, now there's 10 milliliters there and 20 milliliters there, so I'm just gonna mix a small amount right now. But usually when I'm in the studio, I'll do 4 of these and 2 of these, if this is the hardener and this is the resin, like that. But right now I'm just gonna do 10 of the hardener, 10 milliliters, and 20 milliliters of the resin. Okay, so let me see, this one is the glazing resin, and this one is the crystal resin, so it says it right here. The difference is that the hardener on the glazing resin is thick like honey, and the hardener with the crystal resin is watery. It's like, listen, it's like water. So here we go. Now, what I'll do too is, if sometimes you might not make enough, and so I don't pour the resin and the hardener into the same measuring cup. I'll write on the bottom R for resin and H for hardener, and then I just, that way if I, in a pinch, I need to make a little bit more, then these are ready to go. So here's the hardener. We're gonna do 10 milliliters of this one. And then we're gonna do 20 milliliters of the resin. So regardless of whether you're using the glazing resin or the crystal resin, the resin has a certain viscosity to it. You'll see it's a little bit thicker. See that? Oops, I only wanted 20, right? I went a little bit above 20, so I'm gonna put a splash of hardener in the other one here. It helps to be as close as you can to precise. I mean, the less you make, the more precise you need to be. The more you make, the less precise you need to be in the measurement. If you're gonna be doing multiple cups, multiple measuring, then I write it down on a piece of paper, and as I'm doing each cup of each type, I cross it off. Because we get phone calls, the cat walks across the table, you get distracted, right? And then you go, oh dang, I don't remember what number I was on for one or the other. So that way you can, okay, good, there we go. That looks good. So you can pour them in any order that you want. I know some people are like, you always pour this one in first, and then you always pour that one in second. They're, it's like when you eat, it's all going into the same place, so. So there's the hardener. And then here's the resin. The resin is usually the hardest part to get as much of it out as you can. It likes to stick down into the bottom there. Okay, there we go. So normally, in my studio, I would set the hardener cup next to the hardener bottle and resin cup next to the resin bottle, like that. So then if I need to make up another quickie little batch, the cups are right next to the bottles. That's just a trick I use. Okay, so now I've got the two of them in here together, and as soon as I start to blend them, it's gonna get cloudy. So you see the cloudiness there? So the cloudiness means that it's reacting, the catalyst of the hardener with the, so you see that. That's why I like to use a clear cup when I'm showing it to people, because then you can see the reaction taking place. And people always ask, well, how long do you have to mix it? And the answer is you mix it till it goes clear again. Because once it goes clear again, then it is mixed, since the catalyst has done its thing. Now, if I'm doing a large amount, to be sure that whatever's on the bottom gets properly mixed, because you don't want to do a big project and have it not be right, then I take another cup and I pour it into an empty cup. So that way what was on the bottom is now on the top. And then I remix it again for another 60 seconds or so, just to be sure that the whole thing is all mixed together right. Okay, so this is beautifully clear. Woo. Now if I wanted to, I could color this with some of the vitriol, so let's do that. So I'm just gonna pour this into here. There are a few bubbles in there. If you're concerned about bubbles, you just let it sit. The work time is about a half an hour. So you can let it sit for 5 or 10 minutes and a lot of those bubbles will come out. So now if I want to color it, let's see, where's the vitriol? This is the vitriol blue, which is really, really, the cobalt blue is super strong, so I'm just going to put 1 drop in it. There we go. Let's use a different stick. So now I created a blue. If I wanted a little bit stronger, I just add a little bit, but you know, it's always better to go with less color and add more than to put in too much and have it too dark. There we go. So now that's blue resin using the vitriol. And I only use a little tiny bit of the colorant, so it'll just harden fine. And now at this point, I use a dropper, which, where are my droppers? Where are my molds? Let's see. Are there any droppers over there?
Lots of droppers.
May I have a dropper, please?
Colin's just getting you a clean one though.
Yeah. I need a clean one. I know. Sorry about that. I'm going out of frame, you guys. I found one.
Okay.
So if I'm putting it in a mold, first of all, I put all of my molds, if I'm doing multiple molds at one time, I put them all in a tray, because that's nice and flat on the bottom, and then I level the tray. Because if you don't level the thing, it's going to be all sloppy. So you want to make sure that your molds are level. And then I just suck this up into, so squeeze the bulb and then suck it up into there. And then this. So if you're putting it in a mold and you want to get it right in a certain spot and have more control over it, these droppers are fantastic for that. And then that way I can just fill it. If you happen to see a bubble in there, then I just use a toothpick and I encourage the bubble to come out. Now if the bubble is sitting on top and it's avoiding me, you know, sometimes you'll go after it with a toothpick and the bubble will kind of be like, you know, 007, avoiding me. And so I can spray this with spray alcohol, and then when the alcohol hits the top, boom, pops the bubble. You don't want to use too much alcohol, but just a mist, like that, and that bubble would just pop in a second. So that's one of the tricks to getting the bubbles out. Sometimes depending on the mold. The bubble's like down inside there, like maybe it's in a little fold in the mold. So I take a skewer like this, and I go down in and I get that little bubble up toward the top. And then when I spray it with the alcohol, it'll pop. Okay. It doesn't happen very often, but every so often you have a bubble here or there. Bubbles happen. Okay. Let me do the blue one. Notice I started with the clear, right? Because if I went with the blue first, then I'd end up with blue in my clear one. So here we go. Yay! I just love this color. I go through that color so fast. All right, here we go. So those folks that won the blue earrings, this is what I did with the feathers. Okay. And resin, you can sand it. You can, so if it comes out and it has rough edges, I just sand it with a acrylic nail file. Right? It's, you use the nail files that can get wet, because it's better if you don't have, if you're doing a lot of sanding, you don't want dust everywhere. So you want to use the wet type sandpaper, so that, or a wet file, so that you can dampen it and rinse away the dust. Okay, there we go. I find it's always better if you fill it up. If you fill it up to the top, and maybe even have a little bit of a bow going like this, because then when it cures and you pop it out, you don't have sharp edges. If you don't get that little bit of a bow going or fill it all the way to the top, then you're gonna have to sand around the edges because it'll come out sharp. Okay. Now, to clean up from resin, like for instance, I have this, I can actually use this pipette maybe 5 times with resin because I can clean it. So to clean it, I use acetone. Hmm?
Nail polish remover?
Right, but it has to be 100% acetone, okay? Because not all remover is 100% acetone. So, yep, you're gonna use 100% acetone is the solvent for wet resin. Now, let's say that the resin is hardened. Okay, too bad, so sad. If you got it on your carpet, you have to cut it out. There's nothing you can do. If you get it on something like your floor tile, you can sand it down, but once it's hard, that's it, you're done. So what I do is I just use some of this acetone and I suck this up in here. You know what I have to be careful of? I have to be careful of this plastic cup. A lot of times the plastic cups that you're putting the acetone in, well, it'll eat right through the bottom of the cup.
Yeah.
So I've been holding a cup and oh, geez. The whole bottom just came right out. So see how I'm just sucking that into there?
Yeah.
Just like that.
Yeah, no, my plan.
And now it's clean. I love it. Now these are medical grade pipettes. And when we were just doing the liquid oil paints, you can use mineral spirits up in here. And for the mineral spirits, I just keep a pickle jar and I suck the mineral spirits up in, and the next time I'm gonna go use them, I get out the mineral spirits and then I have a clean pipette. But you can't do that with acetone because it will eat through this plastic. I can't just leave it in there like I can with the mineral spirits. So I take this, and in order to not have it, that little bit of residue here on the bottom, so it doesn't clog it, I store it like that for it to dry. And then I can use this like 5 times for 5 different sessions of mold making. Or I could go and use it for the liquid oil paints after that. It's fine. It'll all dry out. Okay, any questions?
I think so. Thank you very much.
That is a good question. So, you said how long will it take for it to get hard?
No, how long will it stay clear? Will it stay clear
Oh.
forever, or will
Well,
it eventually yellow?
all epoxy resin will yellow at some point. All of it. I don't care what anybody says. Okay, I researched the chemistry. It's gonna yellow. But what I do, if I'm using it on a mixed media paintings and stuff, I make sure that I'm not putting it over white. I put it over top of areas with other color. Even if it goes over green, I'm like, well, this green, when this starts to turn just a tint of yellow, and so maybe it looks a little aqua or it looks a little green, will that work with this painting? So I think about it ahead of time. So I'm using the resin so that it doesn't matter if it turns, this is an art resin, that's why you pay more money for art resins, so they have UV inhibitors in them. And the fact that it has a UV inhibitor in it means it's gonna take longer to change tint. And I have pieces that are several years old that are still crystal clear, okay? And so, but I've seen on the internet where, you know, as you get cheaper, they yellow faster. And some of them, if it's industrial grade, it even within a year or two turns into like an amber color, super, super dark. These won't do that because they're art resins, okay? So just be thoughtful for how you use it in a painting. But if I'm doing something like this and I'm making it into earrings, it's gonna just stay blue. Yeah, it won't be a problem. It's just the clear resin, sometimes the UV can get. But this does have UV inhibitors. And then it's gonna take 24 hours for it to get hard. So I leave it in the mold for 24 hours, but I hate it. It's like at 12 hours, I'm going and I'm seeing if I can pop it out or not. And then if you want to shape your resin, whatever you're making a mold of, right? If you want to shape it, let's say you're making a barrette and you want it to be slightly curved. So what you do is at the 10 or 12 hour mark, you check it. And sometimes you can pull it out of the mold just enough and it's still flexible. So then you lay it over top of something that has just the curve that you want. Like put a piece of wax paper or parchment paper and then lay it down on it and let it, you know, just like gently have it go that direction. And then when it hardens, it'll harden in that shape. But sometimes I go and I try to pull these crystals out and the crystals are going all wonky and I'm like, dang it, you know, and then I just put them down on the table and flatten them out like that.
And then how long does it take to cure? 72 hours?
72 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it, so that it's fully hard. You can pour this over top of any non-porous surface. So if you have wood, like a lot of people like to put it on wood or on coasters, like they might use the liquid oil paints to make coasters. And then after the coasters are dry, they'll coat it with the resin. To do that, I would use the glazing resin because the glazing resin has the rounded edges and it's a little thicker. So you can kind of pour it around the middle and then use your stick and just, it'll spread out just to the edges.
So the crystal resin you use primarily for molds.
Right.
And the glazing resin you use primarily for coating.
Yes. You got it. And that's why on the box itself, they put pictures. Like, the other thing is, the liquid art panel that we just used, you can paint with the crystal resin, with different colors of crystal resin. And then, so I create just paintings in the panels, but I use the crystal resin when I'm pouring into the panel to create a painting.
Okay.
That's just resin, colored resins.
Colored resins.
And then the glazing resin, you can see here, it shows you on the picture the rounded edges. You see the rounded edges there? So you can coat something like a photograph and get a rounded edge, or you can use it, what I do mostly with the glazing resin is I do mixed media paintings, and so I'll mix it. You can let it sit for 10 minutes and it'll get a little bit more solid, and then I use my stir stick and I just drizzle it and create three-dimensional texture that's super shiny on my mixed media artwork. And so that's what the picture's showing down here,
Yeah.
right? Where you
On
can
the-
just see the dimension.
On the mixed media panel in my store, they have that, like a big one.
Right.
That does that in the middle.
And then, but you can also pour the vitrail over top of texture like this, looks amazing. You see how the, yeah, I love to do this and then like mix the yellow vitrail or this blue vitrail and then kind of brush it on or pour it on over top of this kind of texture, and then it's darker in the valleys and lighter on the mountains areas, and it looks fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Well,
You're
thank you.
welcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.